want you to picture something for me. You've been grinding for 8 months. You're doing everything yourself, sourcing, supplier calls, tracking shipments, managing inventory in a spreadsheet, probably fielding 3PL codes at 11 p.m. And someone, maybe an investor, maybe another founder, maybe just your own exhausted brain says, you need to hire a supply chain manager. And you think, yes, finally, that's the move. So you post a job, you interview 5 people, you hire someone with a great resume. They've worked at a 3PL, they know all the software, they look excellent on paper. You breathe for the first time in months. And then 6 months later, you're in more chaos than before. The manager is running systems your brand isn't ready for. You're paying a 75K salary for a role your business cannot leverage yet, and you've just burned cash you needed for inventory. That's mistake number 9. And today, I'm going to show you exactly why it happens and what you should do instead. Welcome back to the Supply Chain Moves podcast. I'm Lara, and this is season 1, 12 supply chain mistakes you start in pre-revenue. We are on mistake number 9 today. And if you've been following the season, you've already heard us talk about getting a 3PL too early, over negotiating MOQs, buying software before spreadsheets. And now we're into one of my favorite topics to argue about, hiring. Specifically, hiring a supply chain manager before you're actually ready for one. This one hits different because it feels so right when you're in it. So let's get into it. Here's the truth that nobody in the startup advice world wants to say out loud. Hiring a supply chain manager is in your first year or even in your second is often the most expensive mistake you can make. Not because supply chain people aren't valuable, they are. I literally am one. But because at your stage, the role you're describing doesn't exist yet. I know that sounds harsh, but because everyone says hire before you're ready and build the team early and you cannot scale without people, that advice isn't wrong in general. But it is wrong when applied to supply chain before you have the volume, the systems, and this is the big one, the self-awareness to know what actually you need. Here's what I've seen in 17 years working in supply chain, both in enterprise and DTC. The brands that hire a supply chain manager too early almost always do it for the wrong reason. Not because the work demands it, because they're tired and want someone to take the burden away. And that is a very expensive form of relief. Let's define what this mistake actually is because it's a little nuanced. Mistake number 9 is hiring a dedicated supply chain manager, full-time, salaried in a formal operations role before your brand has the volume, has processes, and the operational complex to justify the leverage that hire. Now, I noticed I didn't say never hire a supply chain manager. I said before you're ready. And here's why founders make this mistake almost every single time. It's because supply chain work is invisible until it's on fire. You're in the early days, you're doing everything yourself, and supply chain feels like this black box you're white knuckling through. And when you finally see the weight of it, your brain tells you, I need a professional. That instinct is correct. You do need a supply chain expertise, but a full-time hire isn't the only way to access expertise. And that at your stage, it might be the worst way. The other reasons founders make this mistake is social proof. Other founders are talking about their ops team. Investors ask about your operation structure. You start to feel like the absence of a dedicated supply chain person is a gap, almost like a credibility gap. And so you feel it because you want to look like you're running a real company. You're running a real company. You just don't need to prove it by burning payroll on a role that's premature. So here's where this gets really painful and why I call it a compounding mistake. First, the salary problem. A decent supply chain manager at the mid-level, someone with 3 to 5 years experience, who know the tools, who can actually run this for you, is going to cost you 65K to 85K a year. That's before benefits. That's before the time it takes you to onboard them. And that's before the productivity dip while they learn your business. At 100 or 200K in revenue, that's a material chunk of your cash. Cash you needed for inventory, cash you needed for your next production run, cash you were going to use to actually build the product. Second, the leverage problem. A supply chain manager is most valuable when they have systems to manage, when there are processes to optimize, when there's a volume to negotiate with, when there's a data to analyze. At pre-revenue to 500K, most of that doesn't exist yet. So you hire this person, good resume, smart, motivated, and you hand them a chaos situation with no systems and not enough volume to build real ones. They either try to over-engineer everything, which slows you down, or they end up doing work that's honestly below their pay grade. Neither scenario is great for you or for them. Third, this is the sneaky one, the knowledge problem. When you handle supply chain yourself in the early days, even if it's messy, you learn. You learn what your suppliers are like to work with. You learn what their lead times actually are, not what they said in the code, but what they actually are. You learn where the cost hide. You learn what your customers care about in terms of packaging, timing, and quality. That knowledge is founder knowledge. It lives in you. And if you outsource that work before you've built the knowledge, you will be dependent on whoever you hired for decision you should understand at a fundamental level. I've seen founders who have no idea what their landed cost actually is because their ops person always just told them a number. That is dangerous place to be as a brand grows. Let me tell you a brand I worked with. They were in the health and wellness space, about 180K in revenue when we connected. The founder was doing everything. She was on calls with her manufacturer in Taiwan. She was handling all the logistics. She was dealing with customs headache. Genuinely impressive. But she was exhausted, and a mentor told her she needed to hire an operations manager to free herself up to focus on marketing and growth. So she did hired someone with a background at a big 3PL and mid-sized CPG brand, paid 72K a year. 3 months in, the ops manager had built an entire system in a supply chain software tool that her brand didn't have the SKU count or the volume to need. Beautiful system, completely unnecessary at their stage, and the manager was frustrated because there wasn't enough complexity to challenge them. 6 months in, the founder and the manager had a parting of ways. Amicable but expensive. She had spent roughly 40K in salary and almost 8K in software subscriptions for a tool they barely used, and she was back to doing supply chain herself. Except now she had 50K less in cash to work with. She told me I thought I was buying myself time. I bought myself death. That is a compounding effect in action. All right, so what's the move? Because I'm not going to tell you to just suffer through supply chain forever alone. Here's the framework I give founders at your stage. One, before you hire anyone, get clear on what you actually need. There's a difference between needing strategic supply chain thinking and needing supply chain execution. Most early stage brands need execution help, not strategy. And execution help doesn't require a 75K salary. Two, explore fractional or consulting first. A fractional supply chain consultant, someone who works with you 10 to 15 hours a month, can give you the strategic guidance you need without the full-time cost. You get expertise when you need it. You're not paying for 40 hours a week of a role that's operating below its potential. I know I'm biased here because this is what Move Supply Chain does. But I'm telling you, this is because I've seen the math on both sides. Fractional wins at your stage almost every time. And when you grow, staffing full-time wins. Three, if you genuinely need someone in the weeds with your everyday, hire a junior operations coordinator, someone who can handle the execution tasks, PO tracking, supplier communication, logistics coordination at a salary that makes sense for your stage, 40K to 50K, and you stay involved in the strategic decisions until you have enough volume that make at a salary that makes sense for your stage, 40 to 50K, and you stay involved in the strategic decisions until you have enough volume that it makes sense to hand those off. Four, make sure the hire is right sized to your current complexity, not your aspirational complexity. You're not hiring for where you want to be in the 2 years. You're hiring for where you are today. Here's your permission slip for today. You can ignore anyone who tells you that you need a full-time supply chain manager at sub 500K revenue. You just don't, not yet. And feeling like you should have one because other founders have them, because an advisor said so, because you're exhausted, doesn't make it the right move. The exhaustion is real. I hear you. But the solution to supply chain exhaustion at your stage is not a full-time hire. It's better systems, smarter prioritization, and strategic support that doesn't cost you 80K a year. The hire will come, and it will absolutely come when you're approaching 1 million, when you've got multiple SKUs, when your complexity actually demands it. You will know. And at that point, it will feel like a real unlock, not a premature relief valve. If you're making more than a few of those 12 mistakes, and let's be honest, most early stage founders are making at least half of them because nobody tells you this stuff. The accelerator program walks you through fixing all of them. Step by step. You can also start with the free videos on YouTube. I'll put the link in the show notes. And if you want to ask me questions directly, come join the community in Circle. That's where I show up most. That's where I show up most. Next week, we are on mistake number 10, ignoring the cash conversion cycle. That one's being covered by Omar. And I promise you it's going to be one of those episodes where you finish it and immediately go look at the spreadsheet in a good way, kind of. I'm Lara. I'll see you next time.